Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. This is the final boarding call, and I cordially invite you to claim your seat, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, there is a huge brouhaha over the proposed state's convention for a series of constitutional amendments put forward by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Abbott's intended goal here is to primarily accomplish about 9 specific tasks. Abbott desires his plan to spark a national conversation about the tenets of federalism, as he believes that the balance of power between the quasi-sovereign states and the federal government has been ignored by the political powers that be. In a very real sense, Governor Abbott is onto something here. As Jeremy and I have mentioned on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, the original tenets of federalism, which is an integral part of our representative Republican form of government, have been attacked. This has been a struggle which has been with us since this country's inception over 200 years ago. Finding the proper balance of power is something that presented a problem even to our founding fathers in the midst of the American War of Independence. The struggle has only grown more pronounced in the current political culture, as the federal government continues to centralize vast swaths of authority unto itself and at the great expense to the independent status of the several states. Of course, states' authority is a rally cry that has haunted the United States in the past, pushing the country to fight a bloody war against itself in the war between the states. In its purest form, there are 6 fundamental principles of government found within the 4 corners of our Constitution. The capstone of the entire system is the doctrine of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is a political doctrine which holds that government is created by and is subject to the absolute will of the people. As Jeremy and I have stated previously, that's part of the natural law tenets that underpin our entire system of government. It is the foundation of American polity. Stated another way, this foundational principle of the United States places the citizens in charge of the entire government and of the way the government is run. The people vote on who represents them in popular elections, and those representatives are supposed to act on behalf of the people. This includes upholding the opinions of their constituents. The first principle of the 6 is the doctrine of separation of powers. That is, the government is separated into different groups, each playing a unique role. By dividing governmental functions between 3 branches of government on the federal level, each branch can focus on one singular function, and one singular function only. It also serves as a preventative measure to ensure that no singular group of people or particular branch of government wields exclusive power. Our founding fathers were exceedingly distrustful of any centralized authority. After all, they fought a long, bloody, and costly war against the centralized authority of the Crown of England. Therefore, they took painstaking measures to ensure that their new nation would not be subject to the same tyrannical overreach of a singular individual or branch of government. The United States government itself, as previously mentioned, is divided into 3 branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches of government. As one can see from their names, the legislative branch drafts, debates, and votes on legislation, which must follow the Constitution itself, meaning that they must trace their legislative authority to a power specifically enumerated unto the legislature from the Constitution itself, and they are the only branch responsible for making laws. The executive branch is the enforcer. In other words, the executive branch acts within its enumerated powers to carry out the laws of Congress. Finally, the judicial branch is intended to determine punishments for those who break the law and to resolve inconsistencies which might occur from specific pieces of legislation. Of course, in the watershed case of Marbury v. Madison in 1803, Chief Justice John Marshall gave the court a power which was never enumerated unto it via Article 3. That power is known as judicial review. So what is judicial review? Well, judicial review allows the judicial branch to decide on punishments that government officials deserve. For example, should the president break the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is the United States Constitution, judicial review grants the court the authority to decide what consequences the president deserves to suffer as a result of his actions. However, this is different from the impeachment power, which is the constitutionally authorized method of punishing a government official for any transgression. The reason the Constitution had designed it that way was to ensure that those who made the decision were still directly responsible to the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, the American people. That would prevent any abuses of power and from engaging in a type of factional debate or fight, which you can see within the government frequently. Thus, what John Marshall did was enact one of the earliest steps of stripping authority from the rightful wielders of sovereignty, because by taking it away from those that are accountable to the people, it allows the government to have some sort of fiat over the people, and that is what started us on the path that we face right now. The case of Marbury versus Madison, perhaps more than any other historical event in the illustrious history of the United States, thrust us into the divisive struggle that has haunted this country since its earliest days and still haunts us to this very day. The next principle of government is that of a limited government. The doctrine of limited government shapes and defines how much power the government can rightfully wield. This is decided on how much authority the people have delegated to them. The Constitution itself embodies the contractual agreement between the people to delegate a specific amount of power to the government. Thus, any time the government oversteps those bounds, it is actually in breach of contract with each and every American citizen. That's the way our founding fathers intended for the government to function. Based on the notion of limited government, the citizens vote on how much taxes we spend and how much money the government is rightfully allowed to take from us. It must be decided by a majority of the population. That's why we have a problem with things such as the so-called Affordable Care Act, or as it is colloquially known, Obamacare. Now we come to the fifth principle of government, the doctrine of checks and balances. This is a system designed to keep one branch of government from gaining too much power. Therefore, if one branch controls or wields more power than the other branches, then the others must either help decrease the powers of the offending branch or build themselves up so as to elevate themselves to the same level. This is perhaps one of the most fractious parts of our government, and one where the legislature has not done the ultimate wielders of sovereignty any favors. Over the years, the legislature has delegated a staggering amount of their legislative authority to so-called executive or administrative agencies. And this is one of the linchpins of Governor Abbott's arguments. Finally, we come to federalism itself. The tenets of federalism have been designed to split political power between a large group and smaller groups within the country. The idea behind this hierarchy is that the governments closest to the people are the ones that are best suited to address the problems directly impacting the people. However, there must be a unified voice for matters that affect the entire national population. Indeed, the Articles of Confederation, which was the precursor to the United States Constitution, was inadequate when it came to addressing questions of a national character. We see the division as follows. National questions are addressed by the federal government. In the minds of the founders, the federal government was to be the most restricted level of government since its authority could impact the entire population of individual sovereigns. The next level is the state government, which ensures that the individual sovereigns are able to address problems which raise to a significant level but would not affect the entire population at large. Then comes the county level, which addresses more specific problems of large communities within a particular state, and even more particularized issues are handled by municipal governments. What's more, the entire edifice of our federalist system is built upon the foundational building block of society, the family. It's for that reason that utopian socialists and Marxists of all stripes target the family. Additionally, this is why we are seeing our traditional institutions, particularly that of marriage, come under a repeated assault. For the socialists, the entire desire is to obliterate the system which currently exists in the country. Having adopted the Fabian school of thought, they are working in incremental fashion, in other words, small steps, to slowly erode the entire edifice of government, with the goal of replacing it with a fundamentally different and alien system. For Governor Abbott, the entire balance of powers has been abused for far too long. He stated on Friday that, if we are going to fight for, protect, and hand on to the next generation the freedom that President Reagan spoke of, and what he was pointing to here was Reagan's first term, then we have to take the lead and restore the rule of law in America. The governor made this statement during a speech to the Texas Public Policy Foundation's policy orientation. His statements drew loud applause from the conservative audience. Abbott's main intent here is to ask lawmakers to pass a bill which authorizes the state of Texas to join other states which are calling for a convention of the states. To support this drive, Governor Abbott has also released a 70-page plan which details 9 specific constitutional amendments which would unravel the federal government's power grab, thereby restoring authority over economic regulation and other matters to the governments of the several states. Abbott went on to say, "The irony for our generation is that the threat to our republic doesn't come just from foreign enemies. It comes, in part, from our very own leaders." He was taking particular aim at President Obama's current extra-constitutional efforts to enact executive orders designed to infringe upon our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. Now, the particulars of his proposal are very interesting. It would prohibit Congress from regulating activity that occurs wholly within a single state. This is what is known as intra-state commerce as opposed to interstate commerce. Interstate commerce is business that crosses state lines, and is something which is specifically enumerated to Congress via Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution. The Interstate Commerce Clause has been a source of contention since the time of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. Under FDR's tenure, the interpretation of the Commerce Clause was grossly expanded, giving the Congress near carte blanche powers which the Founding Fathers never intended to give them. Abbott's second proposal would require Congress to balance its budget. This is something which the constitutions of many of the several states require of their state legislatures. It's also something that would meet a lot of resistance at the federal level. If there's one thing that this bloated federal government loves to do, it's spend money that it doesn't have. Governor Abbott is hoping to put a swift end to that through his proposed amendments. His next proposals are closely linked. The first is to prohibit administrative agencies, or as I've previously mentioned, those agencies belonging to the executive branch of government, from creating federal law in violation of the express separations of power, while the second would prohibit those same administrative agencies from preempting state law. This is due in part to the fact that the Constitution really didn't provide for these executive agencies to wield power over the governments of the several states. In fact, a great many of these so-called administrative agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency or EPA, are not even constitutional in the first place. Next, Abbott proposes a provision to allow a 2/3 majority of the states to override a United States Supreme Court decision. This is taking into account the overwhelming abuse of power caused by the so-called Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and the Obergefell decision, which forced same-sex marriage on all 50 states, irrespective of whether the states had marriage defined in their constitution or not. This is another example of a breach of the separation of powers. Using the doctrine of judicial review, the court has essentially placed itself into the position of being a second legislature. That is never what the Founding Fathers intended for the judiciary to do. Governor Abbott follows this with a request for a 7-justice supermajority vote for any United States Supreme Court decision which would invalidate a democratically enacted law. That, too, is targeting the out-of-control abuse of judicial review to overturn the laws of the states and the federal government, using the example of California's Proposition 8, where the people of that state repeatedly voted to restrict the definition of marriage as being between one man and one woman. This is particularly important because the Supreme Court does not have elections. Rather, the justices are appointed by the President of the United States. For that reason, it is said that the Supreme Court is not supposed to be one of the political branches of government. It is not accountable to the people. Therefore, it should not be used in a way to subvert the will of the people. Yet recently, and especially under the Obama regime, that's exactly what the United States Supreme Court has done. And it has done so repeatedly. His next provision would be to restore the balance of power between the federal and state governments by limiting the former to the powers expressly delegated to it in the Constitution. This goes to the heart of what Jeremy and I have been saying since we aired our first show on September 11th, 2015. If we want to be serious about restoring the United States to its former glory, then we are going to have to restore all levels of government back to a strict adherence to the policies mandated by the United States Constitution. It speaks volumes about the current state of affairs in this country that we would need to propose an amendment essentially telling the government to follow the Constitution. Yet, that's exactly where we stand today. Governor Abbott's next proposal directly targets the doctrine of sovereign immunity. This is a very contentious doctrine that prevents state officials from suing in federal court whenever federal officials have overstepped their bounds. It has created a tyranny which leaves the people and their state officials without recourse. For example, Lois Lerner has not been held accountable for her serious breach of power, and as it stands now, there is no recourse to hold her accountable. Governor Abbott is attempting to address this issue with this particular proposal, although I am sure that this would not prove popular with a vast majority of the nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable governmental bureaucrats who illegally wield power over the American people and enact federal law as if they are part of the legislative branch of government. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. The governor's final proposal is to allow a 2/3 majority of the states to override a federal law or regulation. This is again pointing to a concern that has existed since the inception of this country. The federal government has essentially forced the states to basically hold an inferior position, where it was originally intended that they would stand in a partnership with the federal government. States are said to possess plenary power, or original power, meaning that they do not have to draw their governing authority from an enumerated power. That said, the Constitution bounds both state and federal governments. Therefore, this proposal would allow states to intercede should the federal government act in a way that they believe is unconstitutional. Like Article 5 of the United States Constitution, which states that two-thirds of the legislatures of both houses of Congress would have to vote in favor of a constitutional amendment, the proposed two-thirds of the state's requirement is meant to be a difficult hurdle to overcome. Again, this would be within the notions of checks and balances, and would provide additional safeguards for the people and their respective state governments. Well, folks, as you might imagine, this isn't sitting well with certain groups of utopian socialist types. The ACLU of Texas has already vowed to fight any such efforts, and several state Democrats have also vowed to filibuster the effort should it move to the floor of the state legislature. For me, this is all just a mere representation of a microcosm of the greater problems that we are facing in the country right now. Ever since President Obama assumed the reins of power back in January of 2009, the country has faced one constitutional crisis after another. Obama clearly believes that the sovereignty doesn't rest in the hands of the people, which is totally and diametrically opposed to the foundational vision that our founding fathers had when they devised this country over 2 centuries ago. Rather, at least to Obama, sovereignty rests in the hands of the federal government, and the people should simply acquiesce to any demand or edict that the federal government hands down. It's funny. If you look back to the statements made by President Obama when he was a senator, he lamented what he considered President Bush's abuse of discretion with executive authority. One of the empty claims he made when seeking office for the first time as president was that he would return legislative authority to the legislature. Yet, he never took any steps as a United States Senator to restore the proper balance of power, and during his tenure as President of the United States, he has only increased the power of the executive at the expense of the legislature. You know, if he really believed the line that he peddled in 2007, he would never move to use his executive order power to attempt to deprive the American people of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. That is a clear abuse of power, and something that the Founding Fathers never meant for the chief executive to do. Over the past 7 years, the United States has steadily moved to dismantle the separations of power and to subjugate us all to the iron fist of an overbearing and out-of-control federal government. I believe this is what prompted Governor Greg Abbott to take this stance that he has. Time and again, we have seen the federal government attack the power wielded by the several states in an attempt to force the Obama agenda into place, come hell or high water. Basically, we are moving away from a representative Republican form of government to one which more closely resembles the feudalism of medieval Europe. It's as though President Obama wants to have an oligarchy of like-minded left-wing fanatics lauding power over the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people. And can you really deny it when you look at the state of things in this country right now? Everywhere we turn, the president, whenever he doesn't get his way, is just moving to attack the right of the people and to attack the sovereignty wielded by the people. It is clear that he loathes and despises everything that is great about this country. In fact, he's even gone so far as to say that he doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. He doesn't believe that our creation was divinely inspired. But of course that makes sense because he doesn't believe in the notion of natural law. That is, there is an order, of things, a natural order to things which is prescribed on the hearts of men and women by their Creator. But that goes against the very freedoms that all Americans hold near and dear, and it puts us at a direct threat to moving away from a government which is governed by the consent of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty to a tyrannical and despotic nightmare which our founding fathers fought so hard to prevent. After all, they wanted their foundational vision to be handed down to posterity. That is why the Constitution is so restrictive when it comes to the amendment process, because they understood that some nefarious elements, some time or point later in the history of the United States, might attempt to use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. And you know, that's the very mission of the so-called American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. Time and time again, this government continues to attack state sovereignty and individual sovereignty. And President Obama's own language shows that he wants this type of oligarchy. You must recall that he claimed that there is an orchestrated effort by concerned gun-owning Americans to subvert his ability to keep the people safe. That's a ridiculous claim. And it's not something that a true adherent to the United States Constitution would say at all. A true adherent to our Constitution would undeniably understand that the Second Amendment represents the only so-called common sense gun regulation that would be legal in this country. Our founding fathers inherently understood that the right to keep and bear firearms is a fundamental and unalienable right. It's not for hunting or recreational shooting alone. That explains the inclusion of the militia clause at the start of the amendment. Truth be told, what our founding fathers were attempting to say with the Second Amendment is that no government can take away the sovereign citizen's right to maintain their sovereignty. That's exactly why we have the Second Amendment, to protect ourselves from a rogue and illegitimate move by the government to dominate us, by restricting our unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. What's so amazing to me about all of this is that we have fallen to such an extent in our country where the mere desire to preserve our rights is now viewed, or is at least attempted to be portrayed as, a radical position. It's not that it is a radical position to hold, mind you. Rather, it's that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, along with the rabid socialists infesting our institutions of education, are attempting to indoctrinate the people, as well as the up-and-coming generations, into believing that our fundamental and unalienable rights are somehow antiquated, and that wanting to preserve them is radical and out of step with a progressively minded society. Abbott's opponents are not solely restricted to the left, however. There are conservatives who also oppose the idea of convening a constitutional convention of the states. Their fear rests primarily on the idea that any such convention might be used to further restrict the fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. Some fear that one state or another might attempt to use this process to dominate the other states. However, Governor Abbott has addressed these concerns. First of all, a convention of the states requires the vote of at least 3/4 of the several states, and that abates any domination of any one particular state over the rest. Secondly, the proposed convention would be convened with a narrow scope. That would prevent the issue of our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms from being targeted by the delegates. It would be outside the purview of the convention, and on top of that, the proposals to restrict our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms would not be able to garner the necessary 3/4 vote to become a part of the Constitution. Although our Constitution has been amended 27 times throughout our history, none of the recent amendments has gone through a state's convention. However, Article 5 of the United States Constitution clearly provides that a state's convention is one of the two prescribed methods of amending the Constitution. Article 5 states in pertinent part, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. As we can see from the clear and concise language of Article 5, what Governor Abbott is proposing is not outside the proper scope and application of our Constitution. In fact, he's proposing that we follow the proper method of changing the relationship between the several states and the federal government. This method was provided by the Founding Fathers just in case the federal government started to act in an overbearing fashion, just as it is currently. This is something that we cannot take for granted, because we have to be able to recall that this country requires that we go back to strict adherence to the Constitution. The Constitution, as per Article 6, Clause 2, is the supreme law of the land. And the fact that we have a federal government, and indeed many state governments, that have gone away and have divorced themselves from the proper scope and application of government as prescribed by the four corners of our shared Constitution, clearly demonstrates why we are facing many of the problems that we currently face today. Most of the social decay that we are seeing in the United States of America today is a direct result of this divorce of proper government. This departure from the Constitution has led to the decay that we see. The weakness in our economy is but a mere symptom of the problems that are directly rooted in the failure to strictly adhere to the Constitution. The problems of tyranny and oppression, which are popping up all throughout this country, are also a direct result of our significant and substantial departure from the Constitution itself. Therefore, is it really a radical thing to use one of the provisions contained in the Constitution, as found in Article 5, to properly amend the Constitution in order to take the steps which at least 3/4 of the state's legislatures will have to decide is part of what it would take to fix the government? Now, I'm sure you have all heard time and time again it is such an arduous process to amend the Constitution. Well, of course it is. That is what our Founding Fathers intended. Because when you are just able to exercise carte blanche over fundamentally altering or changing the supreme law of the land, you create instability or chaos in the country. Now, the Cloward-Priven principle, devised by those two devious and maniacal utopian socialists, is designed to particularly overwhelm the auspices of government and governmental systems in an attempt to force the people to turn to government to redress the grievances that are facing them. But that in and of itself is a great abuse of the constitutional system of government. It is a direct violation of our representative republican form of government, and it goes against the will of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people. The people should not be basically coerced into turning to the government. They should not be manipulated in this fashion, because that goes against the very heart of how the American system of government works. But that ultimately doesn't matter to somebody like Barack Hussein Obama or the other utopian socialists that are salivating over this opportunity to tear the country apart from within. That has been the greatest danger that we have faced since the inception of this country. There has been a faction that has always wanted to concentrate power into the hands of the federal government at the expense of the true sovereigns, we the people. But that is not the way that the Constitution devised our government. That is not the way that our government is intended to work. And if we are ever going to restore this country to its proper place and to the proper function of government, we are going to have to require that the federal government, and indeed all levels of government, strictly adhere to the natural law principles that underpin the Constitution and the Constitution itself. And that is what I believe Governor Abbott is attempting to do with his proposals here. Now, it could be easy to try and claim that he's been misguided in his approach here, or that what he's attempting to do here wouldn't help the country, but I don't think that's the case. I think that we are getting nearer to what our founding fathers intended. They provided this framework to us to explain exactly how to fix any of the problems that might arise in this country. That is the duty of a responsible representative government. But the way things are sitting now, and the way that this regime is just trampling upon the Constitution, leading us from one constitutional crisis to another, just clearly demonstrates that we need a permanent reminder to the political powers that be that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that it is just not something that they can ignore. Even though that is what their greatest desire is, they have pitted themselves against the American people. And it's because they are not only out of touch with the people, but it is because they hold this elitist mentality where they look down their noses at the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, and that is a major problem. And the reason I say that's a major problem is it's because these people are now attempting to assume a position of absolute authority, and they are amassing all of this power at the great expense of we the people. But if you recall that one of the basic foundational principles of government under our representative Republican form of government is that the government must operate with the consent and will of the people. That is the major disconnect that we see with respect to these utopian socialists that are moving and marching, basically goose-stepping, lockstep against the will of the people. And again, the solution to this problem rests squarely with our Constitution. That's part of the thing that I have to sort of laugh about when I hear some of the warnings put forward by a bunch of other radio hosts that, look, if we don't find an answer, because clearly we don't have the answer to the problems that are facing this country soon, the people are going to turn and look for a strong man. But that's the thing. It's not that we don't have the answer. We have the answer. It's just we have to find the political wherewithal to actually embrace the answer. It's startling that people can think that we don't have the answer, because the answer has been with us since the inception of this country. It dates back to the very foundation of this country. Our shared Constitution spells out exactly how government is supposed to operate in a rightful and legitimate fashion. But everywhere we turn, the political powers that be have distanced themselves from this proper scope of government, and these political powers have done everything in their power to alienate the American people, to strip the American people of their power and sovereignty, and to amass power unto themselves. And for what purpose? You know, it might be something to say that they are doing this for the benefit of the people, and maybe they even think that what they are doing is for the direct benefit of the people. But I'm sorry, I can't believe that. And the reason that I can't believe that is because it is not true. It is not prescribed within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And folks, just let me reiterate again, because I cannot overly stress just how important it is. The Constitution belongs to us. It does not belong to these nefarious elements of government. It does not belong to those political elitists that are doing everything in their power to distance and separate themselves not only from us, but from the proper restraints on government as contained within the Constitution. They have essentially stolen the Constitution from us and are attempting to destroy it with every step. With each passing moment, they look for more ways to attempt to destroy the Constitution. But again, that does not fall within the purview of what our founding fathers intended for this government to be. And it certainly goes against the natural order of things. Folks, when we understand and strictly adhere to the natural law tenets that underpin our entire representative republican system of government, we are acting in a way that preserves our freedoms and our cherished liberties. Our founding fathers had always intended from day one for us to be proactive. They thought that it was just inherently understood by the people that when our Creator endowed us with fundamental and unalienable rights, that we just understood that certain duties and obligations, by the very nature of natural law, attached with it as well. And with respect to our fundamental and unalienable rights attaches the very significant and substantial duty to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and unalienable rights. And you see, it is for that reason that the Second Amendment is one of, and I believe, the most important fundamental and unalienable rights we have. Because it is the right that we would best utilize to defend all others. And you know, it's very dangerous when the utopian socialist-minded thugs come out and say, look, the Founding Fathers couldn't have meant for the Second Amendment to be unlimited. They couldn't have foreseen the types of so-called military arms that are in existence today. They only had single-shot muskets, which in and of itself is not quite true. They had rifles, too. In fact, the Kentucky long rifle was far superior to the smoothbore brown bass musket carried by British regulars, but I digress. The idea that they couldn't foresee these things is just ludicrous, because when you stop and think about the natural law tenets that underpin our entire governmental system, they are timeless in nature. That means that they cannot become antiquated, that they cannot become outdated, that they cannot be swept under the rug like these nefarious and dastardly individuals are trying to do. They want to amass power at our expense, and they want to force us into perpetual bondage to the government. In that sense, as Jeremy said on a previous episode of the Wright Flyer, there is still slavery in this country. The government is attempting to make the people a slave of government, and that is diametrically opposed to everything that is good and decent about the United States of America. Indeed, that too goes against everything that our founding fathers envisioned with respect to this country. And yet somehow, due to the indoctrination by those frothing-at-the-mouth socialists that have infested our institutions of education throughout this country. And thanks to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, we see that up-and-coming generations have been totally indoctrinated in such a way as they don't understand their fundamental and unalienable rights, and that they have started to see anyone who attempts to safeguard or proactively maintain said fundamental and unalienable rights as some sort of radicalized bigots that are out to cause mass carnage, mayhem, and chaos. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Those of us that are looking to maintain and safeguard our fundamental and unalienable rights are merely acting within the scope and purview of our duties and obligations which have attached themselves and which are always coupled with the fundamental and unalienable rights that have been endowed to us by our Creator. We, as American citizens, are supposed to enjoy and exercise our fundamental and unalienable rights. That is part of the way that our natural law system works. But the way that these moral relativists and these utopian socialists have indoctrinated the up-and-coming generations here in the United States, they are now starting to believe that there is no higher authority. And therefore we see this slow yet steady decay of the moral compass within the United States. And that just makes it easier for these deviants to move forward in their orchestrated, and I'll even take it a step further, their well-orchestrated attempts to tear this country apart. But again, it leads us to the question of just what is it that they are seeking to replace our well-established and our well-founded natural law system and representative Republican form of government with? Well, they are seeking to replace it with a devious Marxist system. And as you recall, when I was speaking as to the tenets of federalism, or the division of powers between this hierarchy that we have, you noticed that the family is the fundamental building block of society. That is just a natural order of things. That is the way the human condition is, and has always been, and always will be, because a child needs a suitable environment to be raised in, one that is stable, one that endows that child with proper values, so that that child can then go on to be a proactive member of society, while also maintaining his or her fundamental and unalienable rights. That is the entire purpose of our natural law system. But when you divorce yourself from the constitutional application of government and the definition of government as per the four corners of our shared constitution, you begin to more easily manipulate and destroy that system, to replace it with socialism, and then ultimately with communism. You know, that's what Karl Marx said when he said that history is linearly progressive. He meant that it would move from feudal state to capitalist state, from capitalist state to socialist state, from socialist state to communism, and then he said that once the entire globe reached this period of communism on a global scale, then the government would simply wither on the vine and die. But you know what's totally and wholly unrealistic about that? It takes away the notion of human ingenuity, human individual rationality, and human conviction. It goes against a natural order of things, and for that reason, it is doomed to fail. But that never crossed Karl Marx's mind. He just doubled down on his efforts, and his adherents would mold, bend, and make his philosophy so malleable that it could be constructed in such a way as to perpetuate government. That's what government does. Government, by its very nature, operates against the will and desires of the people. But you know what was so revolutionary and truly exceptional about the foundation of the United States and about the inception of the United States is that our founding fathers said, no, sovereignty rests in the hands of the people, and the rights of those people cannot be infringed by any rightful, legitimate, or lawful earthly authority. That was so new. It had never been seen before. Yet what we see with socialism is a return to feudalism. Alexander de Tocqueville mentioned that socialists, through their attempts to micromanage the facets of the day-to-day lives of the citizenry, is in fact a form of New Age feudalism. They really are neo-feudalists. A feudal serf would be cared for from cradle to grave by the lord of the manor. Their education, should they have any, would be provided for by the manor lord. And these duties and obligations of care would rise from one level to the highest level, with ultimate authority being concentrated in the hands of a singular sovereign. That is feudalism. But if you stop and think about the very messages that are being espoused by the so-called socialists, even the ones that claim to be more benign, Democrat socialists or democratic socialists, like what we see with Noid-face Bernie Sanders, he goes out there and he says, I'm really all for providing the students of this country with free education and college. And the reason that I am for providing them with all of this free stuff is that they deserve to be cared for from cradle to grave. Well, as you see right there, that follows the very pattern of a feudal society. And that is why Alexander de Tocqueville and even yours truly here have concluded that any and all forms of socialism are, point in fact, actually forms of New Age feudalism. And there really is no way to escape that, because that is part of the central tenets of this idea of giving from those that have the means to produce to those who need. Well, no, it's not that way, because you are the master over your fruits of labor. That's how it's always meant to be. That is the natural way of things. But as you know, socialism goes against that. And socialism has been a dark and dangerous and deadly idea wherever it has been attempted. National Socialism in Germany resulted in the deaths of millions. Communist Socialism in the Soviet Union, which was viewed as a bunch of socialist republics, all pushing for the guise of communism, resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent people. Look at the terrible sorts of suffering that occurred under Saddam Hussein. Now, I know people are going to be scratching their heads and saying, what the hell does Saddam Hussein have to do with this? Well, what was the name of the party that Saddam belonged to? It was the Ba'ath Socialist Party. Again, socialism is tied to so much evil and to so much bloodshed in this world that it is truly a wicked ideology, and there is no way to escape the ugly truth of just what exactly socialism is. Yet, these adherents to this alien and disastrous ideology and philosophy will continue to do whatever they can to twist and obfuscate the truth in order to throw out so much subterfuge as to legitimize their philosophy that they I think they really can convince themselves that they are not the adherents of an evil ideology, irrespective of what the great weight and evidence of historical fact and evidence shows. They disregard it. And they want to make sure that everyone thinks just as they do, because that type of system, where everything is supposed to be collective, they cannot have opposing or dissenting opinions. And therefore they attempt to rewrite history. That's why you see the progressives pushing to tear down our Confederate monuments. It has nothing to do with so-called racial equality. It has nothing to do with political correctness, other than the fact that political correctness is just a weapon to be wielded to achieve the collectivist-style mentality that they yearn and hunger for. That is the danger of what we are facing in this country. That is why we have to force all levels of government to return to a strict adherence to not only the natural law tenets that underpin our entire Constitution, but because of Article 6, Clause 2, the Constitution being the supreme law of the land, we must return the government to strict adherence to the Constitution of the United States itself. That is the only way that we are ever going to see this country have a renaissance. That is the only way that we are ever going to see the country restored to its proper place in history. And that's not a popular position with a lot of people, because it's going to require a lot of work. It is going to require that each and every one of us be more proactive. And I know that that's very difficult to achieve in this fast-paced modern lifestyle which we lead and live today. But folks, we do not have a choice in the matter. If we are to preserve and maintain our fundamental and unalienable rights and our current standard of living and our quality of life, that is what we must do. But we also have to realize that our opponents are just as staunch and stalwart in their beliefs, and that they will mount as stiff of a resistance as they can, and that they will fight dirty. Because socialists have always fought dirty. That is how they were able to supposedly outmaneuver all of their opponents in the past. Folks, we cannot just believe that there is such a thing as a high road to take here. We have to be willing to fight fire with fire, and that is the only way that we will ever defeat such a determined enemy as these utopian socialists, or indeed any flavor of socialists that we will encounter in this world. And that they are just going to continue to redouble their efforts to, quote-unquote, fundamentally transform this country. Why do you think Obama said that one of his goals and desires, right before he was elected to his first term of office, was to fundamentally transform the United States of America? Well, the answer to that is very simple. What he was wanting to do is to destroy what came before, just as Mao did with the Cultural Revolution in China, just as we see these so-called progressives trying to do now with the Southern Cross battle flag and with all of these Confederate symbols, and replace it with a new utopian socialist regime, agenda, and history. But that's totally alien and diametrically opposed to the real and true history of this country, and not just that, but the natural law tenets that underpin our shared Constitution. That is the major disconnect that we, the people, who are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, right now are experiencing with respect to the political powers that be and those political elitists that are doing everything to distance themselves from us and to strip power away from us, amassing it for themselves in an illicit fashion. That is the problem that we, as a people and a nation, are definitely going to have to overcome. And we are going to have the political resolve to actually do that. And that is always much easier said than done. But if any people on the face of the planet have the wherewithal to do this, and have the spirit to accomplish this. It is we, the people of the United States of America. We faced down the most powerful, best organized, best equipped military empire the world had ever seen. And we won. Not only did we won in a stunning, significant fashion that gave hope to liberty-loving people all throughout the world. And it was all based on this idea that sovereignty rests in the hands of the people, and the only type of legitimate government that can exist is a government which governs with the consent of its people and at the behest of the people. That means that the true masters of government is the people. That's how it has to be. But that's what people like Noid-Face Boing-Me Sanders are trying to get away from. And we just cannot deny this. So, we see from Article 5 that there is a clear process for amending the Constitution. And what we see from that is that Abbott's not trying to act against the Constitution. He is trying to use the Constitution to uphold the Constitution. And despite this, we see that his opponents have claimed that this is a laughable attempt to attack the Constitution. You know what's funny about that? They attempt to cite the Constitution whenever the proposals offered would weaken their position, but are absolutely in favor of tearing it apart to gain their own twisted and diabolical socialist agenda. I believe the question which opponents should be asking is whether these amendments are necessary, or whether we can address the problem within the framework that exists currently. This is where the crux of the debate is. It shouldn't be necessary to call for an amendment to the Constitution to force the government to follow the provisions which currently exist within the Constitution. That said, the way that the federal government is currently acting essentially forces our hand on the matter. If what Abbott was proposing represented something completely outside the scope of the amendment process as detailed in Article 5, I would be dead set against it. So would Jeremy. So would our first Air Marshal, Nelson Ward. That said, I do not see this as being the case. Every proposal made by Governor Abbott is following Article 5 to the letter. The particulars of the amendments would need to be debated during the conventions of the states, and then it would still need to satisfy the ratification requirement of Article 5 before any of the proposals would become a part of our shared Constitution as an amendment. Clearly, this is our federalist system working in the manner in which our founding fathers originally intended it to. While a balanced budget amendment might be difficult to ratify, it is something that would put us in a position to gain control over the massive debt that is threatening to strangle this country. We cannot allow the president to continue to get more and more money, as he has under Speaker of the House Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan. As Pat Caddell said in a recent Breitbart piece, 3/4 of the American population feel as though the federal government is ruling without their consent. And remember what I said, that the government is supposed to rule with the consent of the people. So what we see here is a very dangerous development when you consider that one of the basic principles of government is popular sovereignty. That's the thing. At least since the Civil War, 150 years ago, the federal government has been relentlessly assaulting the notion of popular sovereignty. They have limited the avenues through which the public may petition the government for a redress of grievances, and in so doing, they have deliberately removed one of the most legitimate reasons for having a federal government in the first place. Sure, there might be a risk that the convention process would create chaos, but the way I see it, we are already in a state of chaos. We have an executive branch of government that is ruling by fiat, and that is destabilizing the entire structure of our representative Republican form of government. We have lunatics running for office who overtly embrace the title of Democratic Socialists. And everywhere we turn, we see our traditions and institutions being assaulted. We are reaching a point of no return, and something must be done. For that reason, I believe what Governor Abbott is proposing isn't outlandish at all. It is a sign that he is being a responsible leader, attempting to represent the needs and opinions of his constituents. Isn't that what a representative form of government is all about? Furthermore, he isn't doing it through executive action like the president. He's actually reaching out to the state legislature to make it possible. That's how the separations of powers was meant to work. And it's what we should be seeing at the federal level. Again, folks, this is why Jeremy and I say it is so important for us all to have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution. Not only do we gain a better understanding of our fundamental and unalienable rights, but we also gain insight into what it is that our elected leaders are attempting to accomplish. Without this insight, we could fall victim to the subterfuge thrown out there by the salivating mainstream media and the devious utopian socialists. Jeremy and I have also frequently said that the one true way to address the ailments of our nation is to embrace the Constitution. This is how we embrace it. The document itself is not living. The process by which we govern through it is living. Our Constitution and the natural law tenets which underpin it are, by their nature, timeless. If they were living, then our foes could destroy it in the blink of an eye. That's something we must avoid at all costs. Folks, think about it. Whenever the federal government oversteps its boundaries or refuses to act under the proper scope of authority, then it falls to the states to act to protect their population. If the states fail in their duties and responsibilities, then it falls to we the people. That's the very natural law structure that composes our federalist system. Remember, it goes from a limited federal government to the states, to the counties, to the municipalities, and ultimately to the individual sovereigns. That's the way our country was designed since its inception, and what Greg Abbott is attempting to do here is to reinforce that natural foundation. Under President Obama, we have seen the federal government illegally run guns to Mexican drug cartels. We have seen the president abuse his executive authority to work around Congress and the Constitution. And we have seen the federal government punish state governments for attempting to protect their citizens. Take, for instance, the regime attacking the state of Arizona for attempting to enforce our immigration laws. It's quite clear that the federal government had closed its eyes to the illegal alien crisis. When the federal authorities refused to act, the state government stepped up to fill the gap. That's the way that the federalist system is supposed to work. However, the regime punished Arizona for acting in such a lawful fashion. We have a judiciary that rewrites laws to ensure that the power grab by the federal government doesn't fail. Chief Justice John Roberts has rewritten Obamacare not once but twice to ensure that it passed constitutional muster. Yet that's not the job of the judiciary. We have a government that is willfully violating the supreme law of the land, and if nothing is done, then we will continue to witness the utter destruction of our great representative republic. That's something we cannot afford to let happen. And it will surely happen if we fail to act. The United States of America is the last best hope for liberty in this world. And should we fail or falter, then there is no freedom left. All of the efforts by the federal government to divide us are being done on purpose. I'm sure many are asking both how and why this is occurring within the United States. The answer is simple. We have a regime that despises the United States and everything that it represents. We are ruled by a gang of thugs who wish to concentrate power in their hands at the expense of the true wielders of sovereignty, we the people. I know that's not an easy thing to accept. It's not something that most of us, or any of us for that matter, want to hear. Yet, it is the reality that we currently face in this country. Things show no signs of getting any better, and we must become more proactive if we are to save this country. I believe this is what motivates Governor Abbott to make the suggestions that he has. You know, at the time he is proposing this, the president is attempting to flood this country with so-called Syrian refugees, irrespective of the fact that such groups have been infiltrated by Islamofascists. The Chechnyan Mario brothers, Zhokhar and Tamerlane Tsarnaev, were refugees. Yet the federal government was absolutely clueless as to that fact. Saeed Farouk's terrorist bride, Tashfeen Malik, came to this country via a K visa or foreign marriage visa. President Obama was the one that relaxed the strict process surrounding that type of visa, thereby making it easier to enter the United States. This directly led to the deaths of those innocent people in San Bernardino, California. Then, adding insult to injury, the president's response is not to address the real threat that faces the American people. No, he doubles down on his effort to strip us of our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms at the same time. Folks, we cannot forget that this is the man who claimed that ISIS was the junior varsity team. If they are junior varsity, I sure as hell would hate to see what Obama would consider the varsity team. Obama has been leading from his behind, and we can't deny that any longer. His policies are making us weak abroad and depressed at home. That's no way for a country to exist or to be run, and that's not what a responsible leader would do. During his sham of a town hall meeting in which he discussed confiscating the guns of the American people, Obama attempted to say that we can restrict the Second Amendment while upholding the Second Amendment. Folks, that's Orwellian in nature. It clearly demonstrates that the United States of America is in the midst of a major constitutional crisis. The government is ignoring the proper scope and application of its authority. Consequently, Governor Abbott is attempting to follow the Constitution to save the Constitution. You see, folks, that's in line with what it is going to take to save our country. Ever since Abraham Lincoln violated the Constitution to allegedly save it, that has become one of the threadbare and intellectually disingenuous arguments fronted by the federal government to increase its power beyond the limitations imposed by our shared Constitution. To save the Constitution, we should follow the Constitution. To restore order, we should punish those who violate the Constitution. Folks, it really is that simple. That's the key to restoring America. The answer has been with us since the birth of this country. The problem is, our so-called leaders have elected to ignore this fact. They are greedy, yet project that greed upon us. They are selfish, yet claim we are the selfish ones. They are corrupt, but they point the finger at us. It is all designed to unravel the natural order of the country. The Constitution is the key to restoring that order. The Constitution is the key to restoring America. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and I hope to see you the next time that Jeremy and me head up above the friendly airwaves, providing you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment as we always do. I also invite you to leave comments, questions, or concerns either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And we hope that you have a good time, and see you next time. Ladies and gentlemen, do take care.